Welcome everyone. We have some bits and bobs to get through. As ever, if you want to get in touch, Indo Sport podcast at independent.ie is where you can email us. We would very much appreciate if you hit that little follow button thingy on your phone there. That would help us enormously. No obligation or cost, just means you won't miss anything that we do. Ronan Mullen here in studio. Ronan, happy Monday. Do I sound a bit sick?
Not quite.
Not quite. Okay, good. Feeling a bit sick again. Conan, Doherty, hello.
Are you sick, Joe? Yeah, you haven't been telling us this all day long.
I've been sick 2 to 3 weeks out of the 4 I've been here. It's my daughter started creche, and it's a goddamn nightmare.
Oh, God.
She sneezed in my mouth this morning. Actual snot in my mouth.
Oof. I'm glad this is an audio medium.
So the plan is later on to talk to Shane Brennan, part of our production team, of course, NFL podcaster in his own right, because Jude McAtamney from Derry is kicking points in the NFL. And Shane's been writing about that on the website, so he'll come on in later on and fill us all in. And then we've an embarrassment of riches in this building. James McCarthy has, with 9 All-Ireland medals in his back pocket, announced his inter-county retirement. And outside, Conor McKeon, GAA journalist, GAA authority indeed, was hanging around. We said, well, in you come as well. Hey.
Hi, Joe.
Welcome to Bits and Bobs. It's not.
Don't like the dismissive way you frame that there. Is it?
You don't need to bring your best stuff to it.
Right, okay. You should have told me that before I came in. I'm amped.
I'm conscious there are new people coming to the podcast all the time. This is just really where the Indo Sport podcast team at large and a few others like Conor dragged in just chew the fat and the few things going on, the few bits and bobs going on. That's the gist of it, really. So there is already a football podcast with Gary Breen and Dan McDonald talking about Damien Duff, talking about the Premier League weekend. It's meaty and substantive, and that's waiting for you.
As opposed to this.
This more frothy offering.
It's bits and bobs. Did I hear that?
Yeah, it's a debrief. Come here. I forgot to mention it on the football podcast. Did you see the most entertaining thing from Old Trafford yesterday?
Oh.
What would you say the most entertaining thing was?
Go on.
It's like, you know the way Sky now carefully camouflage the fact that they have very little going on at halftime. They come back for like 30 seconds.
That's a different podcast.
It's like, I've seen what you've done there.
It's like ITV back in the day. Remember Champions League? It was, no wonder Roy Keane did it. It was like 4 minutes of work.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a little bit scripted and to the point. So Kelly Cates welcomes everyone back, and it's a brief shot of Old Trafford. And you know, often there's an American celebrity in town, and so they're highlighting Olivia Rodrigo, who I'm not too au fait with. She's a singer. Should I be?
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, are you?
I'm saying somewhere in between. Yeah. I'm aware of her existence.
So sorry, what's her big song?
That's not the point, Joe. She's a cultural phenomenon.
She's not a cultural...
She's omnipresent.
She's not a cultural phenomenon.
She's definitely part of the zeitgeist.
She's hardly omnipresent if I've never even heard of her.
Yeah, we're not using we don't throw the word zeitgeist around, Joe. She is part of it.
Anyway, so Kelly Cates is saying, and Olivia Rodrigo's here, and she's here with her boyfriend. And at that very moment, it cuts to Olivia Rodrigo getting a photo with her boyfriend, who's Dennis Irwin. And then eventually, this is on for like 10 seconds of going, Jesus, what's happened here? And then eventually she gets a shot, then her boyfriend steps back in. Because Redknapp goes, I thought you meant Dennis.
Yeah. Bits and bobs is taking on a whole new meaning of Dennis and
Don't write off Dennis Irwin.
Well, it was halftime in the previous week that was I watching who? Oh yeah, Arsenal Liverpool the previous week, and they spent most of the halftime bit doing a preview, a clip of the Jackal, the new
Sky Original,
and or is it HBO? But they did a full trailer for it at halftime, and then you could tell that they were forced to go, well, that looks good, Roy, doesn't it? And you could also tell that the pundits were told, listen, I know this is obviously a thing that we have to do. Would you please pretend that this is going to be a good thing? So in the 15 minutes for halftime, they managed to cram a full 5-minute trailer plus a good 7 minutes of ads into it.
That's amazing. There's because this is definitely an advent from America where there used to be a great compilation of Joe Buck, who's a great broadcaster, but he used to be on Fox. He's now on ESPN, but it's just a compilation of him having to like coldly sell what's coming up next after the football, and it's just a series of shows that never made it, and you can tell by his delivery that he has no confidence in them to make.
Or even, you know, when if you're in America and you're watching TV, and because they can't cut for ads quite as much, but the commentators then have to say Toyota or whatever it is in the corner.
Yeah.
I remember one time watching golf over there, and the commentators. And by the way, as a man of a certain vintage, I absolutely resent the implication that is the number of ads for erectile dysfunction drugs that go on during the coverage of the golf. But on this particular occasion, it was the two commentators who had to, or the commentator who had to say whatever the name of the brand is and espouse its virtues before going back to Tony Fino on the 12th.
Oh dear. Wasn't Pele always very keen to say, if I had this problem?
The Olivia Rodrigo thing, though, I think the only disappointing thing was initially when I saw the picture, I thought she was asking Dennis Irwin for a selfie. I was like, that's a proper Man United supporter there. And the clip obviously showed Dennis Irwin, who knows well about Olivia Rodrigo.
So a couple of things. Kudos to Matt Hansen, really good piece in the Sunday Independent. It's Movember, which started out as Australian charity to highlight awareness around prostate cancer and has morphed into this gargantuan array of any male issues, testicular cancer, mental health, where there's obviously a real male crisis. So I guess there's a crisis at large across everyone, but certainly a male crisis for sure. So Matt Hansen was talking to the Sunday Independent yesterday, and just to give you a snippet of what he was saying, and I was about to indulge with like the worst kind of cliche, and it's nonsense to say this, I know, but you do have that instinctive thought of, God, Matt Hansen seems like such a joker, an effervescent character, therefore it's a surprise. It should be no extra surprise, of course, but that did cross my mind. I've been living with depression since he was 19 or 20. He says, depression is something I've had to deal with and live with for a long time. I've been lucky, though. I found a way that helps. I can be self-destructive at times. Don't always help myself. Sometimes it just sneaks up on you. You feel like shit and you don't know why. Once you're able to look deep down, you usually find the real reason. Sometimes it just takes standing back. I've been to places where you feel very alone and empty. Once you open up and talk, though, you realise you're not alone. Keith Earls has led the way. He was great for me when I first came into the Irish setup. He's a great perspective. I don't see him as much now that he's retired, but I know I can always pick up the phone, give him a call, lend an ear. So I thought, kudos for sure. Again, sort of in two minds to mention, because I think that kind of disclosure is, or certainly should be, but is generally very normalised now. Like, it's a cross-section of society. So, of course, players who play for Ireland will have mental health issues as well. By the same token, when that guy is going to perform in front of 1 million people on Friday coming, I think it merits a highlighting. Like, it's nice that kind of conversation is just happening and he feels like he's able to do it. So I just thought I'd mention that. James McCarthy has announced his retirement today. 9 All-Irelands to his name. This decision has not been an easy one to make, but I feel it's the right time. Some of the best days of my life, etc. So made his Dublin debut in 2010, 14 years, 9 All-Irelands, Ballymun Kickham's to his core. One of the greats. One of the greats.
Yeah, myself and Conor were just talking about it before we started here. I think, that's undisputed, that he is one of the greats. What's maybe most remarkable about James McCarthy is the sort of unanimity of his popularity. He's not a guy that people from other counties dislike, even if, they might have been victims of his over the years. There is something about the way he played the game, I think, that people find very appealing. That big heart on your sleeve, the big warrior, the lion. But just talking to a few of his former teammates today for a piece I'm doing for tomorrow, and a former manager as well, a lot of them get quite sort of emotional talking about James McCarthy because he epitomised everything that they wanted to become and how they wanted to get there. And for a guy who was quite slight when he started off and very quiet, and really only stood out because he was John McCarthy's son really at the very start, to go from there to becoming one of the great footballers of all time, and in fact Dublin's spiritual leader by the very end of it, is a fair career to have behind you. I suppose it's a small bit surprising just because he did play in those trial games in Croke Park a couple of weeks back, and I think maybe the assumption was that it would be a weird way for him to finish up, but there you go. Yeah,
I walked by him once in a shopping centre. He was very springy.
Yeah. So there's... We're forever, particularly in the GAA community, we're very we're very proud, I think, of our brightest proponents, and we're forever, I think, trying to glorify them into something that they're not. And if David Clifford wasn't playing Gaelic football, he'd be Andrea Pirlo or whatever it is. But I remember doing a piece a couple of years ago, and Niall Moynihan mentioned James McCarthy as being somebody whose athleticism was such that he could have been a high-performing athlete. And I remember it got a small bit of derision online from a couple of members of the athletics community. And I rang Niall again last year, and he says, well, I'm glad you rang me now. He says, but I was only thinking about it afterwards, about what you said. And Niall Moynihan was part of the Dublin Athletic Development Team, or whatever it was called back then, strength and conditioning, when Pat Gilroy took over. And he said, we did a whole battery of tests of these players when they came in at the start. And he said, one of the key tests when it comes to measuring athletic capacity is a VO2 test. Now, it's probably outdated now, but I think essentially it measures the capacity of the lungs to absorb oxygen, and then for your muscles to use that oxygen into, output or strength. And he said that he said, if you give me 2 seconds, I'll give you the reading. So for context, most inter-county GAA players, their VO2 max will be somewhere between 54 and 58. And he said, for an extreme example, Chris Froome's was 85, and that's like one of the highest on record.
Wow.
And James McCarthy was 74.
Wow.
So he said, I have it here now. He goes, obviously James McCarthy is a Gaelic footballer and that's what he does. But from that very raw athletic base, he could have really been anything. And like just talking to people on, as I said, former teammates of his today, they all talk about his attitude and his work rate and his desire and all those kind of cliche things. But I think when you put those two things together, they're the two kind of bases from which everything else came.
It's amazing, if not shocking. See, it's easy to have attitude and work rate and desire when you've, quick maths, 40% better VO2 max. It's not hurting him as much. He's finding all this a lot easier than you are.
No, but I think, and like maybe his capacity to do this is greater than most people because of that. But I'm not sure that everybody would fully appreciate just how injured James McCarthy has been for the last 3 or 4 years, dragging himself through seasons, strapping himself up, getting himself on the pitch. Because unfortunately, Gaelic games is quite, everyone's quite short-termist. This is the only season that counts. And I'm pretty sure he could have gone off 3 or 4 times in the past to get himself properly seen to by a surgeon, but he just kept rolling over, and he literally played himself to a standstill.
Yes, and maybe the VO2 max capacity allowed him to not train the way he ideally would like to, but still perform. I've always an image in one of the recent All-Ireland finals in my head, and it's getting late on, and it's like Aidan O'Shea almost on his knees as McCarthy takes off again from midfield and thinking, I know what my VO2 max is, but it's not yours. Just that, like, this guy's a greyhound.
Yeah, and I remember the piece that Conor's talking about, and I remember the small bit of derision that you're talking. Because initially I saw the reaction, and I was like, "What's the problem here?" Because nobody was saying that James McCarthy could now be parachuted in and land in the Olympics. They were saying a profile of athlete, given the work that he could do for years and years and be an athlete, he could probably be. We could probably guess that he would succeed in that area. And I remember doing a piece with Shane Brennan before, and he was talking about James McCarthy's running. His technique wasn't amazing. He bounded. He said the coach kept saying to him, "You're bounding, James. You're bounding." But McCarthy kept saying, "But that's the way I run."
Yeah.
If he was an athlete, that would be trained out of him, and he would run more efficiently, probably. So the fact that he's doing that, even with that running technique, is interesting. But in terms of like how popular he is by everyone, considering how hard he plays, which is the amazing thing, and he's never dirty, he's clean, he's hard. But I think James McCarthy is the player that every fan promises they would be if they got the chance. Like, put me in there, and like, I'll show you what I'll do. And they'd run if they had the same VO2 max. They would hit, they would get back up the pitch, they would play anywhere. They would just put themselves about, and he just so happened to do it with so much talent as well. So it's very hard to think of anything other than admiration for him.
Yeah. Sound as well.
Yeah, nice fella who wore it pretty well. And you always got the impression from him, and it might have come from, growing up in that family and being John McCarthy's son, but you always got the impression that it meant a lot to him,
Remind us of John.
John was one of the superstars of the Dublin team in the 1970s, which even now, after all Irelands that Dublin have won in the last 15 years, I would argue, and a lot of people would argue, are still the most iconic Dublin football team ever, because, in 1973 there was nothing, and then in 1974 this was created. So he was one of Heffo's armies, and he was a very abrasive half forward who kind of defined a lot, espoused a lot of the kind of virtues that Kevin Heffernan built into his team. So he was very much part of that forward line alongside Tony Hanaho and Anton O'Toole and David Hickey. So it's a little bit like Bernard Brogan and Dean Rock. When a player comes up and you see him on an underage team around Dublin, seeing people saying, well, that's John McCarthy's son. And regardless of whether he did well or he didn't, people are saying, well, he's going to come, he has to, he's John McCarthy's son.
Yeah. That VO2 max stuff's fascinating.
Yeah.
So your average elite GA player was 54 to 58. Froome, Freak of Nature, 85, and James McCarthy was 74.
Yeah, it's good going. Yeah, like in terms of raw material, that's kind of like, I'm not even sure that they knew what they were dealing with until they started to get these readings off him. But he wasn't a big guy at the start. If you look back around 2010, 2011, very slight, very greyhoundish kind of frame.
Yeah.
And he put his body on the line despite the fact that there wasn't that much of it.
Yeah. I had a message in, lads, enjoying the interviews and not the panels. And of course, bits and bobs. I think we'd all agree that... What's the laughter for?
Because the emailer's treating it with the respect that it deserves.
Sorry, Conor is laughing as if... I think we'd all agree sport and politics very much mix. Shout out to Joey O'Brien and his Palestinian hat on Friday. Well, I mean, wait till UEFA meet Joey O'Brien next year. Could be an interesting cocktail. Will you be covering the US election this week, Graham? We were wondering that. I don't know. Like our temptation when you wake up on Wednesday is to do something on it because it just is going to be so gargantuan. But maybe nobody wants us to talk about it.
They're not very sporting. I know Trump and the golf and everything else, but I don't know. I presume Trump is a Knicks Giants fan, but he doesn't. He's not very overt about it, and I couldn't tell you Kamala Harris's sporting leaning. So I'm not sure what contrivance you could put into.
See, I think we'd almost have to just say, this isn't a contrivance, but it's just everyone's talking about it, so we're just going to talk about it and try and get a good guest.
Yeah, I think the Trump example is interesting, obviously, because he is so synonymous with golf in a certain sphere, but then he's kind of alienated himself from all the major leagues because the NFL, obviously, members of the NFL criticised him. Then he started pointing to the NFL's plummeting ratings, the failing NFL. Yeah. And then like you would have seen LeBron James endorsed Kamala Harris over the weekend, that kind of thing. So,
but I just don't know if America's borderline at civil war. Should we be crowbarring in a? Well, let's talk about his relationship with the NFL. I think maybe we just go more on the nose and just get someone on to talk about what a mad day it is.
Well, it's going to be a mad day either way.
Maybe nobody wants that from us.
There was also the famous book that was written by Rick Riley, the American sports writer, Commander-in-Chief, about the various overt and very explicit ways that Donald Trump has cheated at golf, which I think merits a discussion at some stage.
Maybe. Is everyone staying up on Tuesday to watch it, hook it to my veins, or no? Oh, I'll be there every step of the way.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
John King's Magic Wall.
I'll be sick and tired on Wednesday. Because actually, I was just looking into it yesterday. You know the way everyone is talking about polls and how reliable they are. Polls ain't what they used to be. I noticed this. So that didn't really make sense to me, given they can apply all sorts of modelling and simulations and have billions of elections simulated and come up with the most likely outcome. And yet they're worse than ever. Yeah. So I looked into it, and it turns out, I'll read here from this piece I read, one of maybe the big reason in America for the decline is the one-time ubiquity of the landline telephone in the latter half of the 20th century was a gift to pollsters. They could rely on a response rate of 60% from randomly dialed phone numbers because there was no caller ID. Everybody had landlines. And once you got them on the phone, 60% of people said, okay, fine, I'll give you my answers. Whereas now it was saying even the well-respected New York Times Siena College poll gets a response rate of 1%. So they've gone from a 60% response rate routinely in the late 20th century to now 1%. And I think the piece is politely saying this. In many ways, people who respond to those polls are now the odd ones out. Completely oddballs. And more like... Yeah. And so they say this self-selection, because most of us are saying no thanks, can bias the results in unknowable but profound ways. So a guy was quoted, a kind of doctor of all this as saying the game's over. Once you have a 1% response rate, you don't have a random sample. So now the sense is the polls have been embarrassed with Brexit, very embarrassed obviously with Clinton and Trump, and so now they're just artificially weighting things to keep it tight. You know, everyone says it's so tight, too tight to call. Yeah. Nobody necessarily wants to say we have Clinton by 10. So that's why the polls aren't worth a damn anymore. Right?
No, I think
interesting.
I think 2016 did like irrevocable damage to anyone who can remember how misleading those polls were and the complacency that set in because of them. So if you have that in your memory, you're not going to be putting much trust in them. And even Donald Trump on the campaign trail, ironically, he was kind of like a Christian hotbed, and he was making the point that the bookies have us miles ahead. And he's like, but not that any of you would gamble because you're good Christians. But he was like, so he wasn't even looking at the polls. He was looking at what Las Vegas is saying. And like last week, they had him like slight favourite. So time will tell.
Yeah, but like the polls, do the polls also, like if your candidate is comfortably ahead in the polls, are you disincentivized then to vote?
Well, they all fret then about voter complacency and turnout. Yeah. So all these kind of things are going on. Yeah. There's a when it rains it pours aspect for Munster, just to mention briefly. So the game against the All Blacks was talked about all week and then wasn't on TV. And so it's because none of the terrestrial stations wanted it, actually. So it was on Access Munster. And then it turned out the decision to live stream the game went very, very badly. They've had to apologise to many fans who were left without coverage. Did not go well at all. So it's been a kind of tricky week for Munster on the PR front. A question I sort of raised with Ian Madigan last week, I'm curious for all your thoughts on. So Munster make this seismic decision to mutually agree parting the ways with Graham Rowntree. But the results on the pitch don't suggest that that's the obvious thing to do at this juncture. But there's like zero information. It's just mutually agreed. Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Munster. End of statement. Zero interviews, zero insight, zero explanation. When Ten Hag gets sacked, there's no explanation required. When a manager is in the Premier League and is struggling, there's no explanation required. I mean, they can say mutual agreement or parted ways or sacked, but everyone knows they were just sacked because the results weren't good. But in this instance, there probably is explanation expected, deserved. I made the point to Ian Madigan on Thursday. It does illustrate the one-way street, that the reality of fans and clubs. Our fans, we love them, and they're just so much a part of the club and everything. But then a moment like this, zero grown-up, mature. Here's what happened.
Well, what is
information?
So say Graham Rowntree was sacked because the people whose job it is to sack managers in Munster deemed that he was worthy of sack. What's the message you put out then?
Depends on the specifics. I mean, there's talk of, and again, it's all speculation. That's the point. There's talk of splitting the management ticket. Again, speculation. There's talk of certain players not being happy with him. So I guess, I mean, I'm not a madman. They can come out and be like, well, Jesus, those Peter O'Mahony rumours are completely true. He actually did do all, they can't do that. But I suppose, could they, in a polished enough way, say, look, there was stress in the relationships between Graham and the players, and we talked about it and we figured, all right, it's not quite working, and we decided, everyone said, let's call it a day. Something, almost just to placate the wild speculation as much as anything. I don't know, you could polish up a statement of sorts or an interview with Munster Television just to give these beloved fans some insight into this massive decision where nobody knows exactly why it's happened. But everyone's just meant to be like, okay, no problem. Yeah. I'll see you all at Thomond on Saturday.
Not to sound like Malcolm Tucker, but is that not what leaks are for? Get the information out there, let somebody else tell us what happened. Because there is that air of being unsatisfied is the wrong way of putting it, but it's so much stuff is hanging up in there, like for fans, for people who love rugby. I think of the same with GA, Mickey Graham leaving Leitrim. It's only right that somebody addresses that and talks about what happened. It just feels unfinished until then, and we're all supposed to carry on our lives then as normal, even though this huge thing has happened. Like, you're bang on to use a grown-up children analogy, because it's like, let's just not address that and hopefully it goes away.
Yeah, it's just a pity sport's gone that way. It's
just a vacuum of information,
It'd be unthinkable now the CEO would come out and say, yeah, look, Graham and the players weren't getting on. We just had to act. It was maybe 20, 30 years ago, you might just say it and the world wouldn't end.
It's a weird way of doing things, and particularly in Gaelic games now, where nobody, particularly in a county board sense, sort of feels that they need any explanation to give to anybody, you know. Like winter talk is not just the GAA phenomenon, but it is around here. And like by the time people have finished with their own little theory and passed it on, and you go through a couple of months, you hear some of the most off-the-wall stories about why managers have like, honestly, like you couldn't write it in a dodgy Australian soap opera, like the kind of the plot lines and the narratives that people conceive. But that comes straight from what you're saying, a vacuum of information.
I just think give people a bit more credit.
Well, unless it's one of these things, look, we sign an NDA and you sign an NDA because it's sensitive, you know. Nobody wants to be seen as the person who got sacked, and nobody wants to be seen as the club who's a bit above its station and thinks that their results should be a little bit higher than they are.
That's probably the reality of it, yeah. Interestingly,
rugby's usually good at giving people more credit. Like if you continue this comparison, in Croke Park, you're not going to see any replay of a bad incident in GA. In rugby, everyone's going to get to see it because they're giving them the credit. They know they can handle the information. So it's strange that they haven't continued that on.
Actually, interestingly, at Twickenham, they had NFL style, the referee speaking to the stadium for the first time.
Yeah, I saw that.
Wow.
Really?
Explaining decisions.
It's the All Blacks game.
Yeah.
I caught the very end of it. I didn't see that part.
Yeah. It was full on. Okay, everybody, here's what happened here. Went up to the, I was about to say the VAR official. What are they called in the box?
TMO.
Yeah.
TMO, yeah.
It didn't help that was like a double yellow card incident, which was the most confusing thing ever. And it was like, the crowd was like, huh? Okay.
And I think even on TV as well, they hadn't quite decided what the graphic for a yellow and red at the same time. It was like somebody in a graphics department was hastily splicing a yellow thing and a red thing. Yeah. So if you switched it on at that moment, you wouldn't have known whether you were. It was like whether you're allowed to swim in the sea or whether you're not.
Yeah.
But to Conan's point, that was kind of bizarre. It was like the head-on-head collision they were showing in the stadium, and the crowd were going, ooh, every time. It's like as if they were seeing it for the first time each time, putting unnecessary pressure on the referee, I would have thought.
Yeah. We have some Jose Mourinho before we get to our NFL star. So Jose managing Fenerbahce these days, of course. Obviously, we would have seen him against Manchester United. He was involved in a very dramatic 3-2 win against Trabzonspor at the weekend. Did I pronounce that right?
I think so.
Close enough.
He made a really dreadful effort at running onto the pitch and sliding on his knees. I don't know if you've seen this.
He's a bit too old for that now. There was a time when he was Porto manager when he was top class at the knee slide.
Yeah.
I don't even think it constitutes a knee slide because there was no sliding. He just kind of landed on his knees and collapsed.
The pitch was either very dry or he just had a very a kind of material in his trousers that caught. Like it was just like a thuddering halt, and he then went face first flop. So I mean, he's ahead of schedule here. He's 3 years ahead of schedule. He's just gone bonkers. This is an 8-minute rant. We're not going to. Sorry, we're not about to play you an 8-minute rant. He goes on an 8-minute rant. They won 3-2, but he's very unhappy with the standard of refereeing and the system at large. I mean, Damien Duff has talked about channeling Chelsea 05 siege mentality like he's an amateur still. Jose is showing him how it's done. So this is Jose speaking at the weekend.
I think I'm speaking on behalf of every Fenerbahce fan. We don't want him again. We don't want him again. We don't want him because smells bad. Smells bad. We don't want him. We don't want him as a VAR. We don't want him on the pitch, but on the VAR even less. I know what I was told even before I come. I didn't believe. It's even worse than I was told. It's even worse. But we play against the system. And to play against the system is the most difficult thing. Tonight we play against a good team, against a strong atmosphere, against a VAR, and against the system. So very hard. That's why we celebrated so much this victory, because it's unbelievable to win this match against so many powerful people.
Wow.
How are you going to beat the system?
That's Trumpian.
You can't beat the system.
It's early enough in the season. Like, where does he go next?
I don't know. He's honestly, he's 2 years, 10 months ahead of schedule here for the complete absolute. He wants out. I mean, it's just chaos. He's not burning it all down.
He's not far off Graham Souness. Remember Graham Souness with the flag in the middle of the pitch? That was I think the moment of the absolute apogee for foreign managers coming to Turkey and saying, well, if you think your atmosphere is intense, wait till I show you what I can do.
Yeah, he was. It's a long 8 minutes. I mean, he's talking at one stage. He's like, nobody watches this league. Like, I mean, like, what he's basically saying, what am I doing here? But at one stage he says, in London, my son is the only person in the whole city watching these matches, kind of stuff.
But is there an element of these fans, these players are now looking at Jose Mourinho coming in, and he's not phoning it in. He's not just, getting his paycheck. Just like, it doesn't matter if Jose Mourinho have had success. He is all in here already. Like, he's fighting the system with us, and there's maybe something endearing about that as well.
Absolutely, but it turns out the context is they got off to a terrible start of the league. It's like it's not going well, and the pundits are saying the players are all miserable. So it's not like this is just blowing it up.
He's very performative, Jose, isn't he? Like, and I think we've all become a little bit sort of very used to it. Was it towards the end at Inter Milan when he did the interview with Sky talking about that he wanted to come back to England? And to be fair to Sky, they put the context on the interview afterwards and said, just to let you know, Jose actually came to us after the Champions League game. So he is quite a sort of a Machiavellian operator when it comes to speaking and using public appearances and interviews to get his message across.
It's amazing how when he arrived in 2005 in England, obviously Porto was before that. I mean, there was a 2-3 year period there where I would have walked over hot coals to hear him talk. It was just, it was amazing. The charisma, I mean, he just looked incredible. He was so different. I was completely swept away by him. I just thought he was the most fascinating, brilliant interviewee and communicator. And now, like, I can't be listening to him. It's completely gone.
He kind of refuses to grow old gracefully, doesn't he? Like, he hasn't reinvented himself. Like, like managers in football, very few of them stay very relevant for too long, and if they do, it tends to be in one place. Whereas he's gone to so many different clubs and tried to stay relevant without changing literally anything about what he does. His persona, his man management, his tactics, everything about his package, and he's still trying to flog that dead horse in Turkey, it would seem.
Yeah. It's a tough energy to be around the whole time.
I still love him.
Do you?
I love him, yeah.
Yeah.
I was kind of willing him to have one more go at it. Like, he was going to make some sort of Indian summer and win something meaningful, but it looks like that ship has sailed. I'm going to be interested to see this Netflix documentary, which, the extent to which he has his fingerprints over it, but it is going to chart the whole timeline. And was there a shift? Because there is, like, if you look at the years, like, he was still nearly a decade on from that first trust with Porto. He was winning that second league with Chelsea, and that was a not insignificant achievement in that context. But then it just seemed to fall off a cliff. And I don't know why, because the tactics, football hasn't evolved. It has evolved over time, but in the last 10 years, you wouldn't say it's an unrecognisable game. Maybe if you go back the 10 years previously to 2003, when he was beating Celtic, that was 4-4-2 versus whatever. Yeah, I just think he recognises his deficiencies. He just possibly can't fix them anymore.
Yeah, because at Spurs, it was like, he's got this young coach who's, he knows how to do the attack these days. And, so he sort of was aware.
Yeah, I think he was aware.
But it can't seem to turn it around.
I think maybe the personality has finally trumped the pragmatism.
I'm surprised you still like him.
I don't know. I think if I had to hear that every week on Match of the Day, I'd be like, oh God.
That's the thing. Like, imagine his wife, like 30, and he's like, oh Jesus, Joseph, they can't all be.
Yeah,
it's not the system; it's just the electricity.
Yeah, I was surprised though. You're talking about Netflix documentary, the Prime documentary, All or Nothing with Spurs, and I know the cameras are there. He's probably aware, but he didn't come across as dark cloudish as I thought he would. Like, amongst the players, he did seem a bit of crack. I remember him coming in one time, being very emotional about his dog passing away. Like, there was a personal level to him there. He was quite funny at times as well. Maybe the players didn't always get the tone because they seem to have the same tone all the time. And I can imagine if you're losing, then that does get pretty annoying and pretty repetitive. But the thing that stands with me with that documentary was that it started with Mourinho talking about the top of the league, chasing the top of the league. Then it was FA Cup. Then it was top four. And it just kept going down. Even the narrator was like, the League Cup is Spurs' last chance to win something. Then they wrote that. Then it was top six. And I think if you're a player around that as well, it's like, hang on, this guy actually is just
He's obviously,
making it up as he goes
he's
along.
obviously like a natural competitor too, because like how much money must he have now at this stage? When you like tot up all the various payoffs that he had, so he can't be a careerist. That can't be the thing that's motivating him.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some spark inside him for all the performative, the contrived hysteria that he kind of generates around himself, and I think he does like to kind of smirk to himself as he burns the bridge after he throws the match over his shoulder. But like, there's obviously something in him that makes him want to still win things, and you know, like that would be a pretty intense atmosphere to go into every week unless you were fully committed to it on some level.
Yeah, that's fair. Before we go, we should pay homage to Jude McAtamney.
And Jude McAtamney, the rookie from Rutgers, who is from the Gaelic Irish football team, on to kick and made it.
Oh, I hadn't heard the commentary before. This is going to be fun.
In fairness, there were a lot of people there tweeting about it. I said Jude played on the Gaelic soccer team in Derry. So at least the fact they called it Gaelic football, I think, was one step better than some of the other commentators.
That's the voice of Shane Brennan. We should say hello.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for calling me in.
So give us the short version here. Derry under 20 Ulster medal winner.
Yeah.
So during COVID, won an Ulster medal with Derry. How 4 years later is he doing this for the New York Giants in their 27-22 loss to Washington?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, actually. It's during the pandemic, he was kind of sitting around looking at Twitter, saw that David Shanahan, who is a Kerryman, signed up with the college in America with Georgia Tech. And he kind of looked around and said, well, I think I can give that a go. So he went on eBay, got a few pieces of equipment, started practicing kicking in his local GA field. And by 2021, he had signed up with a college in North Carolina. By 2022, he'd signed up to an even better college in Rutgers. It's kind of one of the top five, or sort of, it's a college in one of the top five conferences. It's when you get to a place like Rutgers, it means that NFL teams are looking at you, trying to scout out your talent, see how good you are. Spent a couple of years there, and since the start of the season, he's been on the practice squad, which is kind of a reserve squad for the New York Giants. And it's an interesting one when you're a kicker, because there's only one kicker on an NFL team. So when you're a kicker and you're on the reserve squad, you're kind of waiting for the main guy, for something to go wrong, for him to get injured, or for bad performances to leak in before you start getting your opportunity. And Jude is now the third kicker the Giants have had this season, and yeah, he smashed it. I mean, he was given two kicks to put over the bar. One was kind of point after touchdown. One was a 31-yard field goal. Hit him over. They were kind of bent to the left a bit. There was a couple of them you're wondering if they're going in or not, but it's an incredible. This is the first GA transplant into the NFL that we've had. Obviously, Daniel Whelan was the first Irish NFL player since the 1980s when he began punting for the Green Bay Packers last year. But his pathway was different. He moved to America as a child and did it the kind of the old-fashioned way almost. Whereas Jude was a GA player, as you mentioned there. He was playing on the Derry under-20s team, but then decided, you know what, I'm just going to follow a completely different pathway. As the same way Dave Shanahan did. And, you know, obviously after a springtime when we saw a couple of GA goalkeepers give it a go in America, it's great to see somebody for the first time translate GA skills into the world's biggest sports league.
Wow. So just literally said, I'm going to give that a go.
Yeah, he went
within a year. Yeah.
Got a few pieces of equipment, set up a camera while he was kicking the football over the bars in, what's the name of the GA club?
Swatra, Anthony Tohol country.
So just took videos of it and sent it on to a group called Pro Kick Australia. So they were Pro Kick Australia are a group based in Australia who took a lot of mainly former AFL players, but also some rugby league players, and brought them over. I think that pathway between Australia and America has been set up. I think roughly a third of punters and kickers in college football come from Australia. So I think himself and David Shanahan, that's how they kind of got there. They went through Australian-based coaches and just said, give it a go. We sent some videos, and it's a great thing about the online world. If you take enough videos of yourself doing some pretty cool things, people give you a chance, and he managed to build his way in.
Amazing. Yeah, your talent can be seen straight away. Derry, eh? I mean, come on.
It's brilliant.
It goes back though to the conversation about James McCarthy, that in the GAA we're forever trying to glorify, our athletes and say, well, if only they and the kicking used to be a big thing. Like the big conversation in the mid 90s was, can you imagine how good Maurice Fitz or Colin Corkery would be if they, and now we're actually getting to see what some good kickers. It's interesting his pathway though, because when Charlie Smith is still there at the moment, he obviously hasn't played, but when it looked like it might be Niall Morgan or when it looked like Rory Beggan, I think the the kind of rationale as to why the goalkeepers were being brought is because their technique is very, you kick through the ball as opposed to free takers who spin the ball, and obviously you want to kick through it. And those two are two very, very sweet strikers. But maybe it's not as much of a surprise that it's somebody who's actually given it a bit more time as opposed to trying to adapt maybe their kicking style a little bit later in their careers, like Morgan and Beggan, because they have two ferocious kicks of a ball. But, I think you need to, it's a romantic idea that at 30 years of age you could go to the NFL and go around kicking 50-yard field goals. But like anything else, like repetition. If you get somebody who has those skills at 19 years of age and spends 3-4 years doing only that kick over and over again, I think their percentage chances are far increased of making it.
Okay, what is he, 24 then?
Yeah, he's 24 now. And nice. I guess just on your point, Conor, it's one of the key differences, I think, between Jude's situation and Charlie Smith, who is the kind of reserve kicker for the New Orleans Saints at the moment. It's the fact that 12 months ago, Charlie Smith never kicked in American football. Now, he's learning, he's engaging in coaching right now in New Orleans, whereas obviously Jude has been playing it for at least a couple of years. It got pretty good training in Rutgers, based in New Jersey, so it's pretty close to where New York are based anyway. So they probably are aware of his talents and I guess the process that he has gone through to be able to engage in kicking the ball over the bar, plus the kickoffs as well, which is another different type of skill than what they have in GAA. So I think that's one of the reasons why the Giants, who really had the chance over the weekend to go and try and sign another free agent, as they did earlier this season when their first choice kicker got injured, they signed the second guy. The second guy got injured and they gave Jude a chance. They could have gone and signed somebody else, but they didn't, because they went, I think there was just a general feeling that Jude could have done the job strong enough.
And there seems to be, like, there's subtle differences as well. I don't think that we fully appreciated, particularly around the time there's a lot of excitement about Beggan and Morgan, in that, when Gaelic football place kickers are learning to kick, and rugby place kickers as well, a lot of the process, or at least a key facet of the process, is you pick your spot on the ball to kick it. But somebody was telling me, well, American football kickers, when they're kicking extra points and field goals, the ball's not actually there when you begin your strike. So, between the snap and for it to actually be spiked in the ground,
it's a bit more reactive.
Yeah, you're picking your spot, but you're actually literally starting your kicking action before the ball is in the place where it's going to be. So it's a whatever cerebral thing as much as it's a physical thing.
Quite a disconcerting thing to learn. Yeah. We are out of time. That was Bits and Bobs. Conor, thank you very much for coming in. Conor McKeon. Conan Doherty, as ever, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to Ronan Mullen. Shane Brennan, did you know before yesterday who Olivia Rodrigo was?
I do know who Olivia Rodrigo is. I can't name a single one of her songs. She's one of those people I always mix up with, like Dua Lipa and the rest. I have no idea.
They're all the same.
They're all, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I know Dua Lipa.
Do you?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Good. Dua Lipa's great.
Zeitgeist.
Yeah. We're done. We are talking to Ian Madigan and Keane Tracy tomorrow on rugby, more besides. And like I said, Gary Breen and Dan McDonald waiting in your feed on the football.
Bleed me dry like a goddamn vampire.